Bone tissue is just one type of tissue, and bones, whole bones, are organs that contain many types of tissues. So let's switch our attention to looking at whole bones, these organs made of different types of tissue, including bone tissue, that help form our skeleton. I want to start by talking about some of the different bone shapes that we have, because the shapes of the bones impact their functions. Some of our bones are long bones. That means the bones are longer than they are wide. These are the sorts of bones that we find in our arms, in our hands, in our fingers, in our legs, in our feet, and in our toes. These are long bones. Long bones provide good levers for movement. So the main function of these bones is to allow us to have good movement. Some areas of our body have short bones. Short bones are about as long as they are wide, and we have a lot of short bones in the wrist and in the ankle. The advantage to having a lot of short bones in an area is that they can glide against each other to allow movement in many directions. The role of the flat bones is largely protection. They enclose and protect areas. The bones of the cranium are flat bones protecting our brain. And the bones of the rib cage, including the sternum and the ribs themselves, are providing protection to our internal organs, specifically the heart and the lungs. Some of our bones are considered irregular bones. They have an odd shape, so they don't fit into any of the categories of being long or short or flat. These irregular bones have different functions depending on which bone we're looking at. Some examples of irregular bones would be the vertebrae that form the spinal column that protects the spinal cord and helps hold our bodies upright, and the sphenoid and ethmoid bones that are odd-shaped bones in the skull that are shaped just right to help provide the support that we need for the nasal cavity and the orbit or eye socket. As we take a closer look at bone structure, I'd like to focus on the long bones. So let's look at the parts of a long bone. The long shaft of the bone is called the diaphysis, and the ends of the bone that are usually a little more enlarged because they're going to be interacting with other bones are called the epiphyses. So we have one epiphysis on each end. Between the epiphysis and the diaphysis, we have an area called the metaphysis. The metaphysis is important because it contains the epiphyseal plate. The epiphyseal plate is a band of cartilage between the epiphysis and the diaphysis where bone growth occurs in children. So we have bone in the diaphysis and bone in the epiphysis, and in between, in the metaphysis, is our epiphyseal plate of cartilage that can grow and push the diaphysis and the epiphysis further apart to allow the bone to get longer. Once full bone growth is achieved, the epiphyseal plate is completely turned into bone and becomes the epiphyseal line. The outer surface of the bone is made of compact bone, and the epiphyses are filled with spongy bone. The middle part of the diaphysis and the space around the trabeculae of the spongy bone in the epiphyses is filled with bone marrow. The inside of the diaphysis is called the primary medullary cavity. That's the place where we find the most bone marrow. We have secondary medullary cavities in the epiphyses, and these also contain bone marrow. There are two types of bone marrow in our bones. Red bone marrow is the bone marrow that actively produces blood cells. This is what we call hemopoietic tissue, tissue that's making cells. This is what fills almost all of the bones of children. However, as development is completed, we don't need that much red bone marrow to maintain the level of blood cells that we need to function. So some of that red bone marrow is converted into yellow bone marrow. Yellow bone marrow essentially stores fat. We find yellow bone marrow filling most of the long bones in adults. On the ends of the long bones that are going to be articulating with or moving against other bones, we find articular cartilage. This is a layer of hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is a very smooth cartilage, and this cartilage on the ends of the bones allows them to glide smoothly against each other in the joints. Around the outside of the rest of the bone, other than the ends covered by articular cartilage, we have a connective tissue membrane called the periosteum. The periosteum is made of dense, irregular connective tissue, and as I said, it surrounds the outside of the bone, and it's continuous with important structures like the ligaments that connect bones together, or the tendons that connect muscles to the bones. The periosteum is actually anchored into the bone matrix by little spikes called Sharpie fibers. Inside this fibrous, tough outer layer of periosteum, we have an inner layer of periosteum. This inner layer of the periosteum, of areolar connective tissue, contains a lot of blood vessels, nerves, and the cells that are needed to supply the bone's needs for growth and repair. The inside of the bone is also lined with a connective tissue membrane called the endosteum. The endosteum is a layer of connective tissue inside the bone that also contains blood supply, nerves, and cells needed for growth and repair.